Hello and welcome to The Insider, a show designed to clue you into the biggest news, events and announcements inside the video games industry, discussing with you some things you may know, some things you may not, and the glue that holds it all together is a little bit of my own opinion. My name is Paul James, thank you very much for watching, and let's kick off the episode.
Kev, there was a rumor you were going to show up.
Peter, you can't believe everything you read on the internet.
It's well known that PlayStation is my beat, and sometimes news just falls into your lap. And today, PlayStation, Sony gave us exactly that when a press release, firstly from the ESA, and then followed up from PlayStation, declared that PlayStation will not be at E3 2019. And this is a big deal because E3 is the big tentpole event for the entire gaming industry, and now one of its biggest players is not going to be present. We're going to discuss all of that, what it all means, and a whole lot more in this week's episode of The Insider.
Listen, I'm sorry about this, but as long as I'm here, do you mind if I get something off my chest?
I'm kind of in the middle of something here, Kev.
I'll be quick.
So the news was initially spotted courtesy of a release from the ESA in America that was talking about how PlayStation wouldn't be present, but then PlayStation themselves came out and declared in a little bit more detail the reasons why they're not going to be present at E3 this year, or this coming year. And so I'm going to read this from the press release that was, and some comments that were also made to Game Informer, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. So, as the industry evolves, Sony Interactive Entertainment continues to look for inventive opportunities to engage the community. This is part of what was told to Game Informer. PlayStation fans mean the world to us, and we always want to innovate, think differently, and experiment with new ways to delight gamers. As a result, we've decided not to participate in E3 for 2019. We're exploring new and familiar ways to engage our community in 2019, and we can't wait to share our plans with you. We're going to talk a lot more about what all of this means, these comments, and what ramifications it has for both PlayStation, the gamers, and E3 itself, beginning next.
See, I love gaming, okay? I love you too.
So my initial thoughts when this news broke were actually a little bit different to maybe what they are now. My first thought was, okay, so EA's been there and done this before. EA has their EA Play event, which is adjacent to E3. It runs at the same time, it kicks off E3 historically, and it's EA's opportunity to do exactly what they were doing in their old press conferences at E3, but they get to present it on their own terms, their own way, in their own location. And I thought PlayStation was looking to do the same here. But it turns out that was further elaborated. That's not going to be the case. They are not going to be at E3 or in that period. They're not going to be having a conference of any sort in that window. So that raised a whole bunch of other questions for me then. What is this going to look like? And I guess the thing that really kind of struck me first was this comment that they said, we're exploring new and familiar ways to engage our community in 2019. So we're going to get a new and old sort of approach here. Maybe all of it's new for PlayStation. That all remains to be seen because those words could mean a lot. But the way I imagine what 2019's conferences might look like is not too... It pulls on parts of what we've seen from PlayStation in the past, certainly not this year, but will kind of, when meshed with my other theory and idea here, will become something that could really be quite exciting for PlayStation fans going forward. So what I first expect to return is PSX. PSX 2019 will be big, and what that I foresee that becoming is PlayStation's big tentpole. That is what E3 formerly was. The problem that they've had this year, and I've already spoken about this in past episodes of The Insider this year, is the fact that they were sharing their resources, be it footage from The Last of Us or Ghost of Tsushima or Death Stranding or Spider-Man or whatever these games happen to be, across two big events, and the problem was they didn't have enough to necessarily support both equally. And when the third parties were kind of looking to do their things in other ways as well, it meant that we didn't see some of the PSXs of previous years. We didn't even see some of the E3s of previous years. We were kind of getting those same half a dozen games, big bursts of it, which we all really appreciated, but we were seeing the same footage over and over, or the same games over and over, and it started to get a little bit stale. Now PlayStation can really funnel all their activity, their big headline acts, into this one big PSX at the end of the year, or maybe in a new time slot. Well, that remains to be seen. And then they can maybe support it with Nintendo Direct style appearances. Xbox themselves are leaning into that with their Inside Xbox, and that proved to be really successful when they had their big one at XO18 last weekend. And that was going to be the topic, conveniently, that I was going to talk about until this news broke a few hours earlier today. Nintendo's obviously been doing it with great success for quite some time with the Nintendo Direct, and I think PlayStation's looking to embrace a similar sort of approach. It could be identical to what we see in the Nintendo Direct or an Inside Xbox. It could be something a little bit different. It could embrace that kind of couch, sit on the couch and talk about our work, like what we saw at PSX last year. It could fit anywhere on that spectrum, and that's really interesting. I'm keen to see how they deliver that going forward, if that turns out to be the case.
Gaming is having a ridiculously huge TV in a tiny one-room apartment. Staying up till 3 a.m. to earn a trophy that isn't real. But is.
There is obviously a consequence for both us, the gamers, the consumers of this content, and E3 itself. E3 had its big three. It had Nintendo, it had PlayStation, it had Xbox. And though Nintendo were doing things a little bit differently, they were still present on the show floor. Now, PlayStation is neither. They're on the show floor, or they're on the stage talking about their works, or online, or doing anything to do with E3. So it really changes the dynamic there. There's going to be a lot of space that needs to be filled. PlayStation were arguably the biggest of all the companies there. They had the most representation. And now that's diminished significantly. Does that open the door for Xbox to do more? Presumably. Nintendo, same idea. The third parties, it's hard. They're not as well resourced as PlayStation are. We're still going to see PlayStations there. We're still going to see games on PlayStation there. That'll be because the third parties have teed up partnerships, or they're developing first and foremost for the PlayStation, so it means that SKU is going to be present on the show floor. But obviously what we once knew and what we once expected from PlayStation at E3 is no longer going to be the case. It's one less conference for me, and I'm sure several others who don't travel over to the US to go watch the conferences. It may work out in a beneficial way for us when it comes to sleep deprivation and several other things when it comes to covering E3 remotely. Certainly for me, I always remember PlayStation being in the middle of that Tuesday morning after a public holiday. I may not need to wrangle a few straws and pull some favours like I have in the past. That could be great. But look, we're still going to see PlayStation representation there in some capacity. Xbox, it's a great boon for them. There's less intrigue though, and that's a little bit sad. There was always this big, Xbox v PlayStation rivalry and Nintendo on the side. And what was the dynamic looking like? Who wins E3? We can't have that same conversation anymore. There's lots of things that have changed here, but I don't think there's anything bad about it. We just have to wait and see what PlayStation actually intends to do following this news.
Because every gamer is a true gamer. Motion gamers, sitting gamers, everyone. And though we may pledge fanboy allegiances to different flags, deep down inside we all serve one master, one king. And his name is gaming. Forever may he reign!
And so that concludes another episode of The Insider. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing. All those buttons are down below here. And hit that notification bell. That way you're alerted to every new video the moment it goes live on the channel. That includes Patched, The Insider, Player 2 Plays, Late Game Review, Gamer School, and a whole lot more. Make sure to visit the website. That way you'll get links to all our articles. There's some fantastic content there. That includes news, reviews, previews, opinion pieces, the Player 2 Writers Draft, heaps more, including links to our podcast series, the Player 2 Podcast and Dev Diary. Go and check out both of those. Make sure to visit us on Patreon, patreon.com/player2au. Consider kicking a few dollars. At the lower tiers, you'll get early access to episodes, and at the higher tiers, you'll get monthly exclusives and the ability to join us in the monthly Player 2 podcast. You'll be helping support the Player 2 dream. We'd love to hear your voice on the Player 2 podcast. Consider pledging and helping us grow. For rolling updates, you can find me at Paul James Games on Twitter. The website you'll find at Player2au. And until next time, that is this whole fiasco scenario, breaking story about E3 2019 and PlayStation's lack of presence at it. I'm sure news is going to continue to break in the near future, and maybe we'll have to update this sometime soon. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.